This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so by using a waiting period, a merit and a bonus plan can be assigned to an employee. Sorry, it can be assigned to an employee uh, any time, right at the time of hiring, and basically rely on the waiting periods to control actual eligibility to the merit review process, right? Okay, now the thing is, with respect to other compensation components, right? For example, your compensation eligibility rule. I can build a compensation eligibility rule or a business process condition rule or any of those rules based on multiple factors, right? So I can say any employee who belong to US or is of type regular, he belongs to New York. So I can build my criteria using and or parentheses, and I can build any complex criteria. But when it comes to waiting period, Workday gives us a lot of options, but we can only build on our waiting period on one option, right? So I can either say my employee would be eligible after he completes a waiting period of, let's say, 1 year after hire, or I can say after he completes, for example, 6 months after his he has completed 6 months of service date, right? Or I can say, for example, 1 year from the last time he got a let's say merit increase. So there are multiple options to define your merit period, and we'll look at those options, but you can define your waiting period in terms of only one of these options for any plan type. Okay, we'll quickly look into that as well. Okay, as I mentioned, your eligibility waiting period is only based on a single factor, right? For example, your hire date. Okay, and how does this waiting period works? So in there is a concept called process period, right? And we'll look at this in a bit more detail later. So for example, if I'm running my compensation review, so our, for example, uh, financial year or annual performance year runs from Jan to December, right? Now I am actually initiating my compensation review process, let's say on January 15th of 2020, and this is to assess my performance or assess my compensation for the period Jan 2019 till December 2019, right? So this period for which I am assessing my compensation, it is called my process period, right? So Jan 1st 2019 is my process period start date, and December 31st 2019 is my process period end date, right? Now how does the waiting period work? So if the waiting period is still in effect as of the process period end date, right? And we'll configure this on the compensation review process, right? Then what happens? Your employee is not included in the compensation process for that plan, right? So again, my process period is from 1st of Jan 2019, which is my process period start date, till 31st of December 2019, which is my process period end date, right? Okay, I initiated my compensation review process on, let's say, 15th of Jan, uh, 2020, right? And it will probably run till April when my new compensation gets effective, right? Now I have set the waiting period, let's say, as uh, 3 months from hire, right? Okay, so if I have hired my employee on, let's say, October, November, let's say on 16th or 14th September, which is 9 2019. Now you see that as of from 14th September till 14th October, which is 1 month, and then okay, not 14th, sorry. Okay, so I've hired an employee as of 14th October, right? So from 14th October to 14th November, which is 1 month, from 14th November to 14th December, which is 2 months, and from 14th December till 14th January, which is 3 months. So as of when the process was actually initiated, this employee has already completed 3 months, right? But then as of the process period end date, this employee is still in the waiting period. So your waiting period is considered as of the process period end date. So this employee should have been hired on or before October the 1st, right? You can initiate your process anytime in the future, right? System always considers the process period end date to determine your eligibility waiting periods. Okay, now uh, there is another aspect to it, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So by default, if an employee is not eligible, right, as of the process period end date based on the waiting period configuration, then employee is not included in the compensation review process. Okay, what are the different factors based on which you can build your waiting periods? As I mentioned, you can build it only on one factor, but then there are multiple options available. The waiting period can be based on, sorry, you can base it on hire date. So I can say only employees who have hired who have a hire date 6 months in the past, for example, are eligible. I can do that on the company service date, right? If you remember, if you know, these are all there is a tab, I think, in Change Job, wherein you have all these service dates available, right? Company service date, and I think uh, and there are a few other dates which are available, continuous service date, and so on and so forth, right? I can define my waiting period in terms of continuous service date, right? So probably I joined my organization earlier and then I left and then I rejoined. So my latest hire date is 1st of Jan 2020, but my continuous service date may be 1st of Jan 2018, right? So these are two different dates. Okay, I can do that based on date of last base pay change. I can define it based on date of last merit increase. Uh, what else? Date on the Based on the date that the plan was assigned to me, right? The merit plan itself was assigned to me. So based on the plan assignment date and also based on the position assignment date. So I may be in the same plan for last 10 years, but recently I changed my position and my waiting period is saying I should be in a given position for minimum of 1 year, let's say, to be eligible for that merit process, right? Now, for all these factors, for your date of last base pay change, I can configure something called exclusion criteria, right? So my base pay may change because of multiple factors, right? My change job, my promotion, I was given some ad hoc compensation increase because of cost of living, and so on and so forth. Out of all these reasons because of which my base pay could change, I'm saying if an employee's base pay has changed because of, let's say, corrective adjustment, then that is fine, right? Still include this employee in the compensation review process. But if an employee's base pay has changed, let's say in the last 6 months because of promotion, then that employee is not eligible, right? So I can define an exclusion criteria or multiple exclusion criterias if I'm considering waiting period based on the base pay change. Okay, a lot of theory. Let's go into the system and quickly look into this. Okay, so the task for creating a waiting period is create eligibility waiting period, right? Uh, so the task is create eligibility waiting period. Okay, so I am creating it effective 2010, let's say. Okay, as I mentioned, there are multiple options, right? So I can define my eligibility waiting period based on hire date or based on continuous service date or company service date or any of these factors, right? So for example, I'm saying an employee should have completed a minimum of, let's say, 6 months, right, from his hire to be eligible for the merit plan, right? And then I'll include this waiting period in the merit plan, right? Okay, as you see, there's no option to add any additional criteria, right? So I have just one option based on which I can define my waiting period. Okay, only for your date of last base pay change, that is when I can define the exclusion criteria. So if I come in here, for example, I'm saying exclude the employee, for example, if his base pay change is because of, let's say, change location, right? Or these factors. Now system would see if in the last 6 months, if this employee's base pay has changed, and if it has changed because of any of these three reasons. If it is changed because of any of these three reasons, then system would still consider that employee and include him in the compensation process, right? Okay, so you define this in terms of one factor only, right? And once you've done that, as I mentioned, if I come back to the task, create merit plan, right? Here, once I've defined it, I would be able to select any of these waiting periods. So there's some waiting period created which says 1 year from hire date, right? There's another one which says 3 months from last pay increase, and let's go ahead and open this, right? So it says any employee who has more than 6 months since the last pay increase, except for these factors: office moved or worker moved or changed to part-time to full-time. So if these factors are the reason, then that is fine. Okay, so your exclusion criteria doesn't mean that employee is excluded. It only means if these are the reasons, then your employee is included in spite of the fact that he's in a waiting period, right? Because of the base pay change. Okay, so that was the second factor for creating a, a merit plan, right? And even your bonus plan, your compensation eligibility waiting periods. All right. Okay, any questions before we move ahead? Okay, so the next factor is your time proration rules. Okay, now what is a time proration rule, right? Okay, so let me, all right. So I'm saying any employee who is been in my organization for, let's say, a minimum of 3 months is, based on the waiting period configuration, is eligible for the compensation review process, right? Now let's say the merit plan target says that an employee would get 10% increase, right? Now I have two employees, employee A and B. Now I'm sure you would have already done this as part of your time and absence, right? There also we have this concept of prorating leaves and absences and stuff. right? Your accrual proration and all those configurations. Okay, so this employee who's been in the plan in the organization for the entire year, right? He gets uh, right, and there's this employee who probably joined only 4 months back. So should I be giving an employee B 10% increase, which is exactly the same as employee A, who's been in the organization and in the plan for the entire year? Probably not, right? So time proration rules allows me to prorate the target amount based on multiple factors, right? So I can prorate based on the employee being hired or active in my organization, right? I can prorate again. For example, my employee has been active for the entire year. So he joined on, let's say, 2019 Jan 1st. So he's been in the plan for the whole year, whole of my process period. But then he is been on leave of absence, let's say on maternity leave or any other leave of absence, maybe long-term sickness, for 4 months out of that 1 year. Again, should I be prorating the actual target increase that he gets based on this leave of absence because he has not worked for the whole year, right? So my time proration rules allows me to prorate the target amount based on one or multiple factors. Guys, let me close the door. Give me a second. Okay, sorry guys. Okay, so time proration rules, right? Workday processes uh, proration rules associated with uh, merit or bonus plans, and this happens during compensation review process. So Steve Morgan, he could be assigned a 4% merit increase in his compensation, but then actually at the time of compensation review process, system will consider all these factors based on his performance, his proration, and all those factors, and system may decide that ultimately based on all these calculations he should be getting only 2% merit increase, right? Which of course a manager or the reviewer can overwrite and change, right? Okay, any which ways we'll look at that later. So Workday processes proration rules associated with the merit plan, the bonus plan during the compensation review process in order to determine the proration of the target amount that employee receives, right? And what are those factors based on your time proration works? Uh, you can do that based on your base pay changes. Okay, so for example, from 1st of Jan till 6th of or 1st of Jan till 1st of June or 30th of June, my base salary was 10,000. And then from 1st of July, that is second half of the year, my base salary is 20,000, right? Now, if I'm getting a 10% increase, uh, should system give me 20% or 0.2% of my 20,000, which is my end salary, or it should give me 20% of 10,000, once 100, 10,000 plus 20% of 20,000 and then whole divided by 2, right? How much does it come to? right? It comes to 3000, right? So based on my base pay change, because for the first 6 months my base pay was 10,000, and for the next 6 months my base pay is 20,000. If I consider proration based on base pay changes, then it should only give me 3000, right? Because 10,000 for the first 6 months is 1000, and 10% for the next 6 months is 2000. So instead of 4000, I should only be getting 3000, right? Okay, so I can design my proration rules based on base pay changes. I can design my proration rules based on changes in bonus or merit plans, right? Again, maybe uh, on July 1st, I changed to a different location, and or maybe because of any other factor, my merit plan changed from A to B, right? Now, plan A had 10% merit increase, and the current plan B, it has 20% merit increase, right? So in that case, should I be getting 20% merit increase for the whole year instead of getting only for 6 months and 10% based on the previous plan, right? So I can design my proration rules based on the changes in merit or bonus plan, right? I can design my proration rules, as I mentioned, based on leave of absence, right? So if I was absent for 6 months, obviously my target amount should be prorated accordingly, right? And then time since hire, right? So if I'm not in the organization for the whole year, should again my target amount be prorated accordingly. Okay, there are other factors as well. Let's see what other factors are there. Uh, okay, so the task for creating a time proration rule is create time proration rule. Okay, now I'm saying my proration criteria, and these are all my proration criterias which are available, right? For example, my base pay change, right? The example I gave. My FT changes. So I was 50% FT earlier, and now within the process period from Jan till December, my FT has changed from 50% to 90%, or maybe it has gone down from 100% to 40%. Right? Again, I can prorate based on FT changes in the period, based on leave of absence, uh, based on scorecard profile changes, uh, based on time changes, based on time in the plan, based on the time I've spent in the position, and so on and so forth, right? So I can design my proration criteria based on any or all of these factors. Now, the only thing to consider is when I take leave of absence, then I can also configure something called leave of absence grace period, right? For example, I'm saying if an employee has been on leave of absence because of, let's say, maternity, then that leave of absence should not be considered for prorating employee's profile, right? Let's see, there are no leave of absences configured right now, right? So I would go into the system, and the task for configuring a leave of absence grace period, right? It is leave of absence grace period. Okay, create leave of absence grace period table, right? Let me create it from 1st of Jan 2010, right? And I'm saying if the leave type is, let's say, uh, disability, right, and short term disability, then this should not be considered. So if I was on short-term disability for, let's say, 3 months, then up to a period of 30 months should not be considered for my proration. So actually, my amount would be deducted only for 60 months out of the total of 90 months I was on short-term disability, right? So I'm giving this grace period for an employee who is on short-term disability, right? Again, everyone is supposed to get to have maternity, right? So as per my organization policy, everyone gets I think 6 months of maternity leave, right? So I'm saying, if you do not extend your maternity leave, then I would consider that as a grace period. So up to 180 days a year, even if you have gone on a maternity leave, I'll not consider that as your for prorating your target, right? So if you have, as part of your leave of absence proration criteria configuration, again this is optional, you can also configure a grace period rule. Okay, so the task is create time proration rule. And for leave of absence, uh, so if selected workday, or if the task for creating your grace period table is create. Okay, so workday subtracts the uh, grace period from the total number of days to determine proration. And create time proration rule. Oh, okay, so what all factors did we cover? Let me see if there is anything else. Okay, so what all factors did we cover? We have spoken about your compensation matrix. Okay, so we have configured compensation matrix, your eligibility rules, your eligibility waiting periods, time proration rules, and the final factor, not very complex, it is your rounding rules, right? So you can create your own rounding rules. Again, you would have used this already. If I come to rounding rules and see the existing rounding rules, these are all the rounding rule options available, right? So based on the rounding rule that you have selected, system would either round it up or down, right? Okay, the task for creating your own rounding rule is create sorry, all the kids are at home, sorry guys. So the kids are at home and they are making such a nuisance. Okay, so create compensation rounding rule, right? So I can create my own compensation rounding rule. I can define the rounding option, whether I want to round down, I want to round half down, I want to round up. I can define the precision, as to which factor I want to round it. I can also define the different eligibility criteria based on which I want to round, right? So for India employees, maybe I want to round it, uh, round up, right? For maybe UK employees or for managers, I want to round down, or maybe any of those factors. So I can define my rounding rules based on one or multiple eligibility criteria, right? Or I can just define the default rounding rules, right? Okay. Uh, Again, I'm not spending a lot of time here because this is all very self-explanatory, right? And you guys would have also gone through this as part of your time and absence work. Mm, Task, create, compensation, rounding rules. It is not S, it is B. Okay, again, I'll not spend much time over here. Okay, now if I go back to my plan, right, and this is what I spoke about, the eligibility waiting period. So if the employee is not in the, or not has not satisfied the waiting period, right, as of the process period end date, then by default system, that employee would not be included in the compensation review process itself. So let's say if I'm a manager and I have two employees, right, when I get that inbox item to decide the compensation, once the compensation process is launched, when I open my inbox and my item, I'll only see that there's only one employee to whom I, for whom I'll be able to define their salary and compensation increase, right? Because the other employee, even though he's part of my organization, he's active, because he's not satisfied his waiting period, he's not even included, right? But then there are exceptions to this rule. Okay, and what is the exception? If I go back to my uh, merit plan process, now this is the exception to that rule, right? And the exception is process eligibility, right? Now there are two factors over here under process eligibility. The first one says include active employees in the waiting period, right? So when I select this checkbox, I am not sure, is it because it is I have not selected any waiting period? Okay, yeah. So uh, I'm saying even though employee is in the waiting period currently, right? And I may have 10 employees, out of which maybe two employees are in waiting period but are not active. Leave of absence, just assume, right? So this checkbox will not include, right? So selecting this checkbox will basically include all those employees who are in waiting period, however are active as of the process run date, right? But then there is a caveat here. So if, or let's unhead, so your process eligibility, right? And the first one is include active employees in waiting period, right? And we know what it does, right? It includes all active employees who are assigned to that plan, right? All active employees who are assigned to this plan I'm creating, right? Who are active, but then they are still in the waiting period, right? It includes all active employees assigned to the plan, right? Uh, but are in a waiting period, right? In the compensation process. right? But then even though it includes those employees in the process, the target that it proposes for its employees, it is still zero, right? So let's say I have this employee who's, based on the compensation target, he is getting 4% merit increase, the way we see for Steve Morgan, right? But then if Steve Morgan is in waiting period and I've selected this checkbox, system would include Steve Morgan in the process so that his manager can see that he is in the drop down, right? But then system would not automatically run any of those compensation matrices or any of those calculations, and system would not propose any target for Steve Morgan. So it will still show zero for Steve Morgan in terms of amount as well as in terms of percentage target, right? The second thing is system would not generate any pools for this employee. Now what is a pool? We'll talk. So this is basically the budget which gets created. And what, on what basis would system create this budget? Based on the targets for all the employees. So let's say I have 10 employees, one employee based on his target, and system runs that compensation matrix and all those processes. One employee should get 1,000, the other employee should get target of 2,000, third employee should get 0, and fourth employee should 500. So system would add all these targets to then create the overall pool, right? Then we'll talk about that in more detail. But then these employees who are in waiting period, system would not create any pools for these employees, obviously, because system is not even determining their targets, right? So even though employees are included in the process, system would not perform any action for these employees, right? But a manager can, right? So these are all which system proposes for you, but then we know that managers and HR have their discretion. So based on all the configuration, system is proposing that I should be getting 10% increase, but then my HR, my managers thinks that I'm a flight risk. uh, I uh, uh, I uh, if I leave, there would be a disruption. They say, no, okay, system is proposing 10%, we'll give him 15%, right? The same is true for your waiting period employees as well. Even though system is giving them 0%, my manager or whoever is performing that review, he may give him 1% or 10% or whatever, right? But these are the default settings from the system point configurational aspects. Okay, so as I mentioned, Workday does not calculate uh, the employee target amounts uh, which display as 0, as well as does not generate pool for the employee, right? Okay, so this was the first process eligibility. What is the second process eligibility? Include active employees assigned to the plan during the process period. So I'm saying, let's say I was in this plan, right? So my process period is from 1st of Jan till uh, December 31st, 2019, right? I was assigned to this plan, let's say for 6 months uh, during that process period. So when I select this checkbox, even those employees who were assigned to that plan at any point during the process period but were not assigned to the plan as of process period end date or as of today, even those employees are included, right? Okay, so it, as the name or the description it itself goes, include active employees assigned to the plan during the process period, but not any employee who is in the process period as of the process, who is in the plan, sorry, as of the process period ended, that employee is any which way is going to be included, right? If he satisfies the waiting period criteria. But this is for those employees who were assigned that plan at any point in time during the process period, but not are in that plan as of the process period end date. Okay, so with that, we have looked at all the aspects of a merit plan, right? What else is left? I can configure that my merit plan is an MBT plan, right? So by default, whatever compensation increase, so I'm getting 1,000 rupees increase, right, or a 10% increase. It basically adds to my total base salary, right? So your merit increases if we go back, and this is what we had discussed when we started with our merit plan. Your merit plan basically changes the base pay, right? So whatever amount I get, that directly adds to my base pay, right? But then if I'm saying this merit plan is an MBT plan, then it doesn't change my base pay, it changes my overall CTC, right? And this is how it works, right? Especially for us. So it doesn't just update my salary, right? When we get our merit increase, it our CTC goes from 100 to 200, and based on that increase, all the internal components all automatically increase, right? So our PF, which was earlier 10 rupees, now it becomes 15 rupees, right? As an example, our special allowance, which was 20, now becomes 25, right? So when you select this, it would change your overall primary compensation basis, and then the normal algorithm works. System would distribute that increase among all the plans which are part of that MBT, right? So your MBT also works for your compensation review process. Okay, so manage basis total. Okay, select this option to apply merit increase to the primary compensation basis, right? So our CTC is our primary compensation basis. Uh, Instead of total base pay, right? And what does Workday do? As I mentioned, Workday automatically allocates the amount to the individual plans that make up the employee's primary compensation basis. Okay, so that was manage basis total. What else is there, right? Allow target override. So if this checkbox is selected, as I mentioned, managers, they usually have the discretion, even though system is doing all that proposing all those targets, but my managers have the discretion to override the amount, right? And that happens when this allow target override is selected, right? Hide target, when hide target is selected, for example, Steve Morgan. See, Steve Morgan, if he goes to his compensation profile, he can see that his target is 4%, right? But then I want to hide target from an employee. So this is still visible to your comp admin and your managers and partners and stuff, but you are basically hiding the target from the employee. So he doesn't see that his target is 4%, and at the end of the year he gets only 2%, and he says he'll go back and say it should have been 4%, right? Because that's what my target is, right? So I can hide target from my employee, right? Reference currency, because this is an amount based plan, it gives me that option to select the reference currency. So this is the currency within which all your calculations happen, right? All your reporting, they're all done in terms of your reference currency, right? For your merit plan, your reference frequency is always annual, so you cannot change it, right? Again, subject to statutory minimum. If you select this, then it means whatever target system is proposing, you can always override it. But then this is the same concept as the hourly plan, right? So I can still override it, but I can not go below the value which is already proposed, right? So if I get 2%, I can change it to 3% or 2.1%, but not to 1.99% as a manager. right? And many of these union jobs, they have this concept, right? They will discuss and negotiate that an employee should get minimum 1% hike or 2% hike. When I was working for this UK company, they would have this 1 month long negotiations wherein we'll discuss and come to terms that all employees should get 10% increase and managers should get this XYZ and stuff, right? And then obviously you can always give an employee more than that if he's good, but not below that, right? So same concept as we saw on an hourly plan. uh, uh, if it is subject to statutory minimum, then I cannot assign. And this is also relevant in many European countries, right, wherein government decides that the inflation is 2%, so you cannot give a merit increase less than 2% for your employees. It should be a minimum of 2% to adjust for the inflation, right? Not very common in India. Okay, then you define the compensation matrix. Once you've selected the compensation matrix, you can also say that this is only used for the purpose of reference, right? So it is only uh, the the calculations are shown to you, but then they are not automatically proposed to the employee, right? Again, we'll look at this and how this works in the compensation review process. My time proration rule, my rounding rules, I can, and then this is something we've already discussed. And then I can define my plan profiles. So I'm saying 100 GBP is the default target amount, but then for an state's employee, right, it is, let's say, 500 US dollars, right? And similarly for UK employee, it is 200 GBP. For a UK manager, it is 300 GBP, and so on and so forth, right? Exactly same concept as your merit plan profiles, right? Okay, now how does it actually work in the system, or when the compensation review process is launched? If you see, when I initiated request compensation change for the employee, system gave me an option to assign an individual target, right? Which is basically I can override the target which is defaulted on the employee profile. So if I go back, uh, let's open Steve Morgan's profile. Okay, so merit is 4% annual, right? And if I go ahead and open the merit plan, right, is getting it from here, the plan profile, right? But then if I go to request compensation change, you see that I can assign an employee an individual target as well, right? Now this is how the system would actually work in the compensation review process in terms of defining the actual target, right? Target percentage or target amount. System would first check if an employee has individual target, right? So this is the target which is explicitly defined for the employee when I assigned him that plan, right? At the time of proposed compensation hire or request compensation change and so on and so forth. So if I go back to Steve's profile and let me show that real quick. So we saw that yesterday as well. So if I go to compensation, now this is usually what will happen in proposed compensation hire, right? But then I'm just showing you. Okay. Oh no, this is bonus plan. Where is merit? Yeah, here it is merit, right? So it is 4% annual, and this is the target he is getting from the plan profile, right? But then I click here, I can assign him an individual target, right? Only for this employee at the time of his compensation change, I'm assigning him a target, right? Okay, so system first checks if an employee has an individual target, and that is the target it uses on during the compensation review process, right? Okay, if the employee doesn't have an individual target, then system checks the compensation matrix, right? And then validates all that compensation matrix, his performance and all that factor. Obviously, if an employee has an individual target, that overrides everything else, right? So the next priority is if an employee doesn't have an individual target, that's when system checks the compensation matrix and then evaluates the target of the employee based on the matrix, right? And then on that target, all those rounding rules and proration rules, they all then work on the target, right? Okay, if there is no compensation matrix defined, and we've seen that compensation matrix is basically optional. Okay, sorry guys. If you see compensation matrix is not required, right? It is optional, right? So if there is no compensation matrix at all as well, then system checks the plan profiles, right? So again, if I come to my merit plan, I can define multiple profiles for my plan, right? Just like my allowance plan profiles. And then if there are no profiles as well, then finally system uses the default target, or if my employee is not eligible for any of those profiles, then system uses the default target, right? And this happens in the time of compensation review process. So if I go in here, look at my employee, right? He has a compensation matrix, but obviously this matrix would only be evaluated during the compensation review process, right? Because that is where the performance and comparison, they all come together, right? So system would check if Steve Morgan has an individual target, let's say 10%, then system would use that. If there is no target that is assigned, system evaluates the matrix and then assigns the target for the employee. If there is no matrix assigned, or if the employee is not eligible for anything based on the matrix, then system checks is the employee eligible for any of the plan profiles. If that is not the case, then system assigns him the default target. All right. Okay, so I would stop here. We have covered all aspects of the merit plan. We'll actually see all of this action in action when we launch the compensation review process, right? So your other plans as well, there are very straightforward. There are a few exceptions for your bonus plans wherein you can consider your company's performance as well, right? So we'll talk about those factors as well. We'll see how your grid is configured, and we'll talk about your stock plans. They are very simple, very straightforward, your stock plans. And then we'll see how your compensation process is launched. All right. Any questions, guys? Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. So I'll take that as a no. All right. So let's stop here. Uh, we'll continue with this in tomorrow's class. All right. Guys, thank you so much for joining. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.